So I'll be sectioning her hair too. I normally always part at the ears, like this. And this client also has super, super fine hair. Tip your chin down for me. And I normally like to kind of go by the occipital bone. Put this out of the way, and we can see she has her roots here. So she has previous work. And so I'm just gonna go in and try to add some more brightness towards her root. I'm using my Framar foils, curving around her head. And with blonde solutions, you do have to really pack it in. It is a little bit different than some of the other bleaches I've used before, but more saturation, greater lift that you get. And I don't always like to go up to the root too, just because she's going for more of a rooted, lived-in look. And so in order to avoid a harsh grow out, I use this brush and kind of just feather up a little bit. It's just a little bit softer. So as you can see, I'm definitely layering this lightener on here. And because I do that, I have to foil my packets a little bit different than I normally would. So it does take a little bit extra time, but I'm also in no rush when I'm doing a transformation like this. So I'll fold up, and then sometimes I'll just tuck that little tail up. So that way, it being so heavy with the lightener on there, that way it doesn't slide down and it can stay pretty high up to the root. Okay. Then I kind of just move on to my next section. I'm still going for lived in, so I'm not trying to pack it too, pack the foils in too close together. I still want to have some depth at the root as well. Sometimes it's very easy when you're doing platinum to over foil. So I'm gonna go in again. Take a small, fine section, and then pack it in again. And I'm really targeting the darker areas. And then feathering. And the feathering on blonde solutions, I noticed you can't feather up that way. You still kind of have to pack it on there thick, otherwise it will not lift evenly like the rest of the hair. Pick up any darker pieces and leave out her lighter pieces so they don't get over processed. Okay, fold it over, tuck the sides, and then I tuck the bottom. And I basically will follow this pattern all the way through her crown. And sometimes when I'm foiling, because a lot of people have cowlicks up here, I kind of like to see where the hair falls. Sometimes we treat clients just like they're mannequins, so you can't do the same section on everybody. And so I know, I'm pulling this hair back, but if that hair falls forward, I'm gonna foil it with the side, and same thing over here. And she has a deep part as well, and so she has a lot more hair on this side of her head, so I'll probably approach this side first. Typically, we wanna go up just horizontally, but sometimes you have to double check with their cowlicks and how they wear their hair. And so I like to see where the hair falls. So I don't want to pull this hair all the way back and foil it like this and then accidentally foil it too high. So then I kind of like to shake it out a little to see where her natural hair falls. Then I will readjust her part and put the hair where it falls. So then that makes my section in the back smaller, so I can continue up horizontally and then approach this as its own section. So now my smaller section, same thing. Tuck your chin again for me. I know a lot of hairstylists use larger foils, and yes, I could be doing that with her too, but I really like to keep the section small when I'm doing platinum because it keeps it a little bit more precise. So I stick with these traditional Framar pop-up foils just because they're the perfect size for what I need. And so when I'm picking through this hair, this is a pick through, so this also adds a lot more time, but it makes the platinum even cleaner when you pick up as much dark as you can in your section that you're foiling. If you leave it out, it will look like tiger stripes. So feather again, fold up halfway, tuck the corners, fold the bottom up. So you should be able to move up the crown pretty quickly since your section got smaller. And because we're maintaining depth, you should not be foiling every single hair. So sometimes if I'm doing the crown area in a partial like I am right now, I will probably foil anywhere from like 5 to 10 foils depending on the area, the surface area. And so for her, we'll probably get close to maybe 6 foils on the crown area. So we have another pick through. It's really important not to over foil those blonde pieces and overlap, because then she will have breakage. And if there's a lot of pieces, sometimes I'll just take another foil and layer it just to protect those super blonde pieces already. And this does take more time, but it's not about how many foils you put in, it's where you put them. Okay. I always like to keep my client kind of like a little bit lower than I am, because sometimes if you're foiling too high, I feel like when you have a foil, you don't get the right amount of tension, and so then the foils can slip. So make sure you're always adjusting your client so that way it matches with your body language and it makes sense. So just go gentle. Another foil. This is the tension that I'm talking about. Make sure you're really saturating it. And this goes for any lightener brand, but specifically Blonde Solutions, just so you get the maximum lift. So flip up halfway, tuck the corners, and I just do this little bottom tuck because it's Blonde Solutions, so that way all of that heavy lightener in there doesn't pull my foils down. Okay, gonna do my pick through, preserve all of her light pieces, and really saturate it. And because I'm starting with such a low developer, it gives me time to do a bunch of other things on her ends before I have to come back and check these foils. And it's such a gentle lightener that I know even without an Olaplex or some sort of a bond builder that it's gonna protect her hair. Okay. And then I always leave a little veil on top for blending purposes, but also not over highlighting. So that's gonna be my whole back section. And like we said before, she parts her hair over here, a little bit off center, but she has a lot more hair in this surface area, so I usually tackle the side that has the most hair. I feel like it makes it faster. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but I believe that. Okay, and I'll find her parting from her ear earlier, and I just do it right behind her ear. And sometimes the angle is more straight, sometimes it's a little bit more tipped towards the corner here. Today it's a little bit more towards the corner. So I'll detangle, and then I kind of look and see where I want the angle to be. So I'll probably approach it from this angle and I will pivot. So we'll do a bold face frame, a few foils, and I'll start to pivot to cover all of this area right here. And that gives me enough depth so that way she's not looking solid. because most people are liking this low maintenance look, so they don't want to have to come to the salon all the time. Okay, so I'm going to take this up the angle here and continue my same pattern, still using my 10 volume, pulling out any super light pieces to protect her hair, still feathering the top, so that way when we melt it later, it's just seamless. Fold it in half. So you're gonna have a similar amount, somewhere from like 6 to 10 foils up top in this section, and then we'll mirror it on the other side. And I also like to pivot, tip your head back a little bit. I like to pivot the section. So I will be going up on an angle, but I'll be pivoting to leave little pockets of depth in between, so that way we do not overfoil. Same thing how we did here where we spaced it out. It's spacing it out according to the round of her head, the way that her head rounds here. And this is just one of my favorite little techniques to do to keep depth in. And it's just working smarter, not harder, because it's really hard to add depth back in once you've over highlighted. So you can kind of see an old pattern that I had here too, doing the same thing. And that's the fun way whenever you see your own pattern and you can follow it, it becomes a lot easier when they come in for a touch-up, because you know what to do already. So I will pull out and pick through. You can really see the dark pieces standing out against this light. So this is what I'm pulling through. I'm not really going over her super blonde pieces at this time. Most of her hair drama is going to be at the bottom and in her face frame. Do that same thing, fold up, tuck the corners and the bottom. Okay. Okay, we have another pick through. Probably the only challenging things about going over baby lights is having to pick through all the dark stuff, because it's such a fine section. But it's super important and you cannot miss it. It makes the difference between a lazy technique and a precise one. Quote me. So I'm still leaving all that face frame out because we've already done it recently, and so we will paint it on at the bowl where it's a little bit more gentle. And then also I have my veil up here, so I already pre-sectioned that out before I do my last couple foils, that way I don't grab it on accident and then make it too blonde on top. I'll split that section in half, pivoting, do another little baby light here, keep it nice and tight, so that way the foils are precise. And with this product, you also can never over-saturate. So just when you think you've got enough, just maybe add a little bit more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I have 6 foils, just like we predicted. I'm still on that same bowl of lightener. And where the other section hit too, it's kind of also where their parietal ridge is, where the head rounds. And so make sure you're not going too deep into the side here if it's like a mini touch-up. That way you don't put too many foils right there. You can kind of see where her money piece is right here. Her hair's very fine, so we actually usually go about 5 foils back to give it a really big money piece. And on some people, it may only take like 3 or 4 foils. So I don't want to cut into that. So your pattern kind of just tells you where you need to go. So we're gonna have a lot less foils over here. Tip the top of your head this way. So you see how small our section is here? It's gonna get a little trickier, so you always have to have a pivot point. So I'll probably like start here and start rotating until I end up parallel. And this is a part of bangs that she's growing out too. So I'm gonna go ahead. Sometimes when you have to double up foils, it gets a little thick here, so just make sure you don't pack in 100 foils, otherwise it will get really heavy and hard to navigate. Okay, pivot. So we're leaving these little pockets here. Sometimes I don't always need to double, like pack in another foil. It just depends on how much dark is in there and how thick the section is. So right now I'm not gonna use a double foil. I can just fold it up. Pre-section, and I have one little foil, and then that's it for this part. Please don't by here. Okay, perfect. And this is her partial for that. And then everything else we're gonna do is gonna be like popping Teasy lights on the bottom, just to add a lot more platinum versus kind of more of this neutral, leaning on the golden side. I will usually like to tuck up the area that we just did all of those foils, at least the hair hanging. And I wanna just look at the canvas that's below it. So I'll just tuck that and clip it to another foil. Will you tip your head down for me? And then again, where the hair kind of naturally parts, that goes towards the front. This is more in the back. This will also be the area that she swings forward. Most long-haired people will always swing their hair forward, so they like to see those pops in here. So I'm taking that into consideration. So I'll split this section a little bit more organically. I'm not doing as clean of a section, but I'm just thinking about her lifestyle and like how she wears her hair. She always wears her hair down, usually, unless she has like a little clip or something, but it's mostly always straight. So I'm gonna look at these pieces, and this is like still pretty dark. I'll flip up here. She has a little bit more light, but I'm not gonna think about it too hard. Just gonna go with my gut here. I'm gonna go for bigger pops. I'm going to tease it, which will be really fun taking this out later, just so there's a little cushion. And then also this is the 5 volume, so it's a lot more gentle. I'm not as concerned about overlap because it's gentle, and I will check on this too. So I'm just putting this down here. So this is more of a baby light technique that I do towards the root. It's a little bit more precise. And then this one is more of a teasy pop, and this is just organic placement according to lifestyle, the density of the hair, and the look we're trying to achieve. So this will just give her those fun pops and it not look stripy or anything like that on the bottom. So some people will use balayage technique. I don't freehand paint like that. So this is like my version of it. And I'm pushing all that hair sideways to really, really, really saturate it. This is gonna be sitting on her hair for a while. Because I teased it a little bit, I talked about it earlier, you don't want to feather the blonde solutions like brushing up, but I do have a little bit more of a cushion now because I teased it. So I would say you can bend it like that rule when you're doing teasy pops. And when I brush this tease down, it's gonna just soften this line. And then when I go back to melt it, it's also gonna be softened even more. And sometimes I have to go in the foil and resaturate it if I wanna see a little bit more lift, and that's okay too. So then I layer this on top. And I keep these flat. I try not to bunch it up in a foil because that can also create inconsistent lift. And then especially with the foils that lay on her body here, these are gonna lift the brightest because of her body heat. And so I'm thinking about that too. Keep the developer low so it doesn't lift too fast. So again, I'm just kind of looking to see where this would fall. Okay, so I want to stand in front of the section that I am foiling and be parallel to the idea of where the part would be. A little poppier section here versus the fine baby light. I see a very bright piece in here, so I'm going to just pull that away. If you see a very bright piece, you can kind of pull it away. It's okay if we overlap some of these pieces because they're not quite as bright. I'm just teasing a little bit to get some of those baby hairs out of the way. This is really where you need to trust your product. I know her hair is going to be still healthy even when doing this because Blonde Solutions technology allows it to be. So again, I'm going to keep this foil nice and flat. I'm just going to stack another foil directly on top and not fold it up a bunch, like fold it up halfway, because that can create a line, which can create a pocket of dry lightener, or it just might not be as saturated, and that's what you want to avoid. Make sure you're pushing the product in, pushing it sideways. And some people do Teasy lights while they're doing baby lights, like in between, but I like it to be more controlled. And I know this is gonna sit on her body heat too, so I prefer to do it this way. That's just me though. And I'm gonna make this corner a little higher to her face. So it's really like less is more. You don't wanna do a ton, but just in the places that it matters. So I'll just repeat this process to the front. I'll still leave her hairline out where that money piece lives. That is the lightest part of her hair currently. And we'll approach that at the bowl, doing some wet freehand painting. See, I don't want to remove all of this depth necessarily, because this is what makes all that bright stuff pop. And typically I'm mixing like 5 bowls of lightener for something like this, so I feel like I've been pretty good, only doing 2 so far, but I will already need a 3rd, I can tell. Each foil does take a little bit longer, but like I said earlier, it is about working smarter, not harder. And it's not how many foils you put in, it's knowing where to put them in. Where to put the light pieces, where to keep the depth. So still preserving that pocket, teasing it so it will blend out right there. Really adding a pop at the bottom. You can use a board too. Sometimes having too many tools, I'm really clumsy and I'll drop everything. So I just noticed the less tools, the better for me personally. But I've done it both ways. And by adding pops on the bottom, this will make that transition a lot more seamless too. It will give her a lot more contrast. So the baby lights will allow for a blending. We have the cushion here as well, so 2 times the amount of blending. We still have a color melt to do at the bowl. That's 3rd insurance right there. And then guaranteeing the bottom is gonna be lighter than the top also makes for a beautiful blend. So that's the whole back section. We ended up doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pops in the back. I'm still gonna keep with the 10 volume. I'm gonna take her money piece out because we're gonna paint that later. So we'll leave that out. We can also see how fine these hairs are, so we really wanna protect them. Everything else is now the new section. So I'm just gonna go in and weave. I'm gonna over direct it because the angle is a little bit more on this side. There's some lighter pieces, so I will take those out. And then we're still gonna bring this corner up higher, closer to her face, and just really, really saturate. Still keeping this pocket of depth up here. We're just gonna be finishing adding these pops in the front here. That way it helps create that darker to lighter transition, so she feels the most brightness. Keeping the depth, super, super important. That's why we didn't want to overfoil on top. Keeping anywhere from like 6 to 10 foils per section, depending on how big it is. We ended up using about 6 per section, except on this left side, it had about 3, I think. 3 because it's a little bit smaller. She has more hair on this side. And then she's gonna end up processing for a while, so that way we get it really, really nice and bright. And we've left out her face frame, so that way we can paint it on at the bowl to protect her ends. That is the lightest part of her hair currently, so we did not want to over process. So yeah, you just basically mirror it and make sure you're following the same pattern and technique, and to not make a section bigger than another, because then you're gonna have an inconsistent lift. If you do a super fine weave all of a sudden down here versus that bigger pop, it's gonna look different. So you're really trying to make sure you're mimicking the same techniques on both sides to create that color melt. And you do it according to the client's density, the size of the section. Don't treat them like a mannequin. So preserve the depth. Pull out a super light piece if you need to. Since it's sitting on for a while, just make sure you don't over process the white pieces. She will probably process for about an hour and a quarter, but I will be checking her as I go to make sure it's lifting properly and we're protecting her hair. It's okay to rinse as you go. I actually don't really up my developer too often. I just create more time for it. So I'm not in a rush for my clients to get out. I'd rather do it right the first time than to fry their hair and then you can't come back from that. So you're still over directing this forward. That way when it swings back, it also will connect to the sections we did back here. I feel like sometimes too when I'm mixing blonde solutions, they're 30 grams of lighteners, almost like twice as much it feels like. So I feel like it kind of goes a long way. I do remix a lot because I saturate a lot, but I feel like the bowl of lightener itself goes a really long way. So sometimes if you're doing just a root touch up and you're not doing all of this, mix less, like maybe even 25 grams instead of like 30 or 35 or 40, because it may actually end up being too much color. So this will be my last one here. I'm really trying to break up this darker color in between. You can see all the depth that we're leaving in here is going to be our transition area. It's going to be so pretty. So this section's super tiny, and that's okay because she has less hair on this side. So between our money piece here, so we're leaving that part alone for now. You see her darker pieces in here, so that's what we're trying to get. For her foils or her freehand paint that we're gonna do at the bowl on her face framing, I will probably use 10 volume because it's already gonna be wet, so it'll be a little bit more diluted. And that one's also gonna process for a little bit too. Bringing this corner up a little higher, and it drops down lower. Super saturated. We're gonna take a little sneak peek and see how it's looking. She's still cooking, but it's looking really good. So I definitely like to go in and check to see how it's doing.